Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Code to Cloud. This topic for this episode is going to be all about open source and its origins, right? And the mythical journey that tech professionals have taken over the past. I was going to say 20 years, but it's more like 30 years, probably longer now, right, George? And I met
Yeah,
with one
the
of my
adventure.
the adventure, right? And we're going to talk about me and George's like origin story when it came to open source as well. So I've spoken about my guest a little bit, but Jorge Castro, welcome to the show. Do you just want to introduce yourself? Tell us what you do.
Thank you for having me. I'm Jorge Castro. I'm a community engineer / DevRel at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And I've been around a while. I've worked on Ubuntu. I've worked on Kubernetes. I've worked on Kubeflow. Worked on Cloud Custodian. A whole bunch of stuff. But now I'm mostly working on everything. So,
what did you do on Ubuntu? Interesting.
Ubuntu server. Well, I started on Ubuntu desktop actually way back in the day. I was a community manager there, and then transitioned to Ubuntu server during like my second stint. So I think I spent about 10 years there. So
is that at Canonical, right?
At Canonical, yeah.
Yeah. So okay, well, we'll talk about that because I used to get the stickers in the mail. We'll talk about that, right?
Yeah,
with the free CDs. But I hear you've just been back to my homeland, right?
Yeah,
in London, KubeCon. How was that? Like,
yeah,
what was
awesome.
the feel, man?
Biggest one ever. Over 12,500 people. I don't know if you've seen the pictures, but that Excel London, we packed that thing, man. It was awesome.
It's right by the river, right?
Like, yeah, we were out in the middle of nowhere, and we were staying out there, and all the locals were like, "You're out in the middle of nowhere."
Well, they'll say that, right? Unless you're right near Westminster, you're not in London, right? It's kind of a running joke, right?
But we caught the tube, and there's a show called Rejects, which is a few days before. Right. So we took the tube, and that was in a more, I don't know, Londonian area. I saw Trafalgar Square. We're like driving by. I saw the sights, and I haven't been to London in about a decade, so it was really good, and reconnected with some old friends as well. So that's always fun when you do that.
I love that, right? You know, when you go to an event and you haven't seen someone for a while and you spot them and you're like,
yeah,
hey, how's it going? Right? Like kind of thing. So that's awesome.
You always refer to them with their GitHub handle too, because you're like, oh, what's their name again? I remember their GitHub handle though. Yeah,
I can recall all of your Git history, but I don't know your name, right?
Yeah, it's like, I know you hate these computer languages, but I cannot remember your name.
That's funny. What were the big things there? Top of mind.
Lots of big things. So, it started off with a banger. We over 50% of KubeCon attendees, it's their first one. So it is a very dynamic rotational thing. So I focus on the first day, I focus on onboarding new people that it's their first KubeCon. So we have a thing called Project Lightning Talks, where so we have over 200 projects in the CNCF. And so we try to cram them all into lightning talks, and we have a project do a lightning talk every 7 minutes. We start at 9 a.m. and then we finish at like 5 p.m. And the idea there is like, if you're new, you have these projects, you have no idea what they are, you could just go and you could sit in that room all day and just ingest the stuff directly from the maintainers. So it's the maintainers themselves giving the lightning talk. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of sit down and get a little slice of everything that's going to be around all week. And the idea there is like, oh, I'm a storage person. These are the cool storage things. I want to make sure I visit those booths, when I go, because during the actual show, I help run the project pavilion, and the booths the projects have their own booths and shifts where the maintainers will staff those, and then people could come up and have questions. They have demos. We almost always have stickers for all of these projects, so everyone gets their stickers and all that stuff. And really, the intent there is to connect people to open source projects and maintainers as efficiently as possible. So that's kind of the gist. So there's almost always each KubeCon, there's like different things that people are hyped up about depending on where we are and where the tech industry is. So a lot of KubeVirt this time around. That's a huge one. Kubeflow continues to blow up. They had a little pre-conference the day before, and they nailed that. Kubeflow is very interesting because it's kind of an umbrella project for a bunch of other AI and ML projects, and it's been kind of quietly doing things in productions for years before the kind of the AI hype. So it's very much one of those plumbing projects that is quietly running a bunch of stuff, but you don't hear a lot about it. Helm is about to transition to a Helm 4 this cycle, so that's going to be a major breaking change for them. I think their session was standing room only at that point. So they've announced basically their plan this year to migrate stuff so people can get involved with Helm. Helm is one of those projects where it's heavily used by end users, so the impact of major changes like that is important. So that's why they kind of do it a year out to get people interested. Let's see what else. There's a bunch. Do you have any specific ones?
No, that was great.
Cilium eBPF continues to always, like, everyone's going to talk about. That's always going to be a top thing. All the service meshes, like every single, Envoy, Linkerd, all of that stuff still blowing up and huge. A lot of these have before KubeCon, there's like a colo day, and they'll have their own colo-located stuff. So if like you're into WASM, you can just go to that. And Backstage is probably another one I would put on that big list. That's self-service developer portals.
That's right, IDPs, right?
Huge amount of like every platform team is like, I need to go look at that. So yeah, that one's definitely growing a ton. There's a little bit of something for everyone. So when people come to, I ask them, are you a networking nerd? Are you on a platform team, storage? And then if they say all of it, then it's well, you're going to have a busy week. So that's what we try to do is get people where they need to be so they can learn this stuff.
Sounds awesome. I've not been to one yet, right?
Oh man, you're missing.
I'm still trying to convince my illustrious employer that it's the right
yeah.
thing.
So we have a page that says, convince your employer or whatever. Next one in Europe is in Amsterdam, and Atlanta this fall is where the next
that's
US
the one.
is.
The North American one is the one I'm going to try and target. One. Yeah, I'm going to bring. Yep. I've already spoken to the CNCF Calgary crew right here in our chapter, so I'm like, we should all go, right? So we're trying to bring the planets in alignment.
You should make a shirt. Make a shirt. We love it when groups make like their own shirt from their region. So like I'm in Michigan and we made a Michigan Kubernetes shirt and everyone remembers that. Well, so that's my tip.
We're famous for being like cowboys, so we might wear Stetson hats right around at the conference. That would be hilarious, right?
It's brilliant. Yeah. And then we have 3 other KubeCons actually, because there's North America and EU. There's India.
Wow.
China, which is going to be in Hong Kong again this year.
Lovely.
And Japan, which is the one I'm really trying to go to. Yeah.
Do you know what? Japan's on my bucket list, man.
Yeah. Yeah, they're always like, okay, who was a volunteer to do this work at these KubeCons? And then we get to Japan and everyone's fighting over it. And it's interesting as well because like we have CNCF ambassadors all over the world and they're regional, right? So,
yeah.
Like the Japanese CNCF ambassadors are like pretty cool. I hung out with one called Kohei, and it's like, oh man, I would love to go to your country and get the tour from you. So bad.
Literally, right? The inside track.
Yeah, so it's not just about the tech for us, right? It's this kind of community blended where it's like, yeah, we have jobs and we have to talk about the tech, but what keeps open source healthy is kind of those contributor to contributor relationships. So that's what we try to foster with programs like the CNCF ambassador program and stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. But that's a great segue, right? I wanted to like, do you know what? I feel like I'm getting older, George, right? Like I've got
Dude, I know I'm getting older.
I know, right? But like I was trying to, I felt like Obi-Wan. It's the only way of trying to explain it. Sat down with these early in careers and I was trying to explain how all this got started, right? And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, well,
it's so hard because you're like, just go, because when when I was growing up, these structures weren't in place.
It was
All you
wild.
had
Yeah.
was a Linux user group, if you were lucky,
Yeah.
in your town. And I had that, and Michigan user group. And without that, I would have never done that. But the reason those groups were so popular, well, relatively popular back then, is you couldn't really install Linux without a friend. So like they kind of grew out of this thing sucks to install, and then it became like more user groups where it's like as it got better and the technology got better, they just became normal meetups, right? Instead of just so, and as .com came and the entire growth of the entire industry, they kind of like grew out of that. But then, at some point, like the concept of a Linux user group kind of fell to the wayside, and now it's like more. I mean, they're still around. My lug is still around, but now it's more meetups around general tech topics. Where in the old days, only the
Specific.
Linux nerds knew that. Now, if you want a Java user group, that thing, like around here, that thing is larger than probably a bunch of Linux user groups put together. So, and our cloud native meetups are also like quite large. So I'm going to one to Budapest here next week, and some of these are hitting hundreds and hundreds of people. So for us, it's a good way to kind of spider out away from these huge conferences, which are like these logistical, like it's a journey to get to a KubeCon almost.
Yeah.
But the KCDs, the Kubernetes Community Days, it's a 1-day investment. It's close, it's regional, so it's probably closer and cheaper for you to go, and you get to meet the people locally around yourself, which is really good. So like I kind of see that as an evolution from, now if you're just getting started and you go to one of those, you are so much better off than we were getting started, because it was really no one really knew what they were doing back then because they were new, Now it's like, hi, you're new here. All right, here's the course, here's the onboarding thing, here's what a contributor guide looks like. What are you into? Networking, storage, all of it. Okay, here's a little vertical slice. Here's the landscape. Here are projects. This is how you find where their team meetings are, whatever, or where their Slack channel is, and you can go hang out, outside of just meeting once a month, and that helps build communities, right? Like that kind of decentralized approach. So
For sure. I was telling this tale of my first Linux encounter.
Yeah.
So somebody from school had this guy who lived like, I don't know, 2 streets down, and they got speaking, and they were like computer nerds, right? And
Yeah.
like we were using XP, I think at the time, or Windows 2000. Anyway, he came back and he went, "That's not cool." I mean, what do you mean that's not cool? Oh no, there's this thing called Linux, and I'm like,
Yeah.
what's that, right? So like you'd get on the internet and you'd find these text-based websites, effectively, right? And and then you're like, one name came up over and over again, right? Associated to it back in the day. Could you imagine which company it was? Right? It was
Company.
yeah.
About what year?
I'm going to say like 2000, right? So which company do you think like over and over again came up when I was doing my research?
All right, so it had to be pre-Ubuntu. Red
Yeah.
Hat's too much of an easy answer.
No,
Was it Red Hat?
it was Red Hat, right?
Oh, that's the easy answer, because you had Mandrake back then.
Do you remember that? And that was from France, right? They all had origin stories, right? These distributions, right? And so we went on a hunt to try and find Red Hat, right? So we went to all of these stores because we thought we had to buy the software, right? This is how naive I was. I was like 12 or 13 years old, and we went around this big city, me and my friend, and we couldn't find it. And then we literally spent 6 hours trawling computer stores asking for this, and they were like, "We don't know what it is." And then I literally went to we called it a day, and I went, "Look, I'm going into a newsagent's, right, which is like a newspaper store or a magazine store, right, that you'd have in the States." And I'm like, "I'm getting a soda." So I went in, and I thought, I'm just going to look at the computer magazines, right?
Yeah.
Because I was a big gamer. And then there was a whole section on Linux.
Yeah.
And it was like, I can't even remember, like Linux format. I don't know if you had those in the States. There was a couple, right?
Linux
Anyway,
Journal. I
yeah,
remember Maximum PC used to
yeah.
exist back then. Like, and each one of them had like
The
distro
free,
of the month or something in the
yeah,
back.
yeah.
Yeah, and you just had to wait for the one you liked.
And I just picked it up and I went, it's £5, right? And I was like, it's strapped to the front of the magazine as a freebie. And I just went to call my friend and I went, I
Did
found
you
it.
just steal it?
No, I I paid for it. I think I paid for it. But
Yeah.
like I went home, installed it, thought I was like Neo out of the Matrix or whatever, right? Installing this
Yeah.
thing, and nothing worked on my computer. Nothing, right? The sound card,
Yeah.
like, and but I learned so much from that experience because, like you said, you needed a friend, and I just
Yeah.
remember the original days of going on a forum, going, "Hey, my graphics card doesn't run this, and this, right?
Yeah.
How do I get it working?" And I just get called the noob, right?
Yeah.
But like, it taught me so much about how operating systems were built. How, like, I remember switching it on, and there wasn't even a boot screen. It was
Yeah.
the grub bootloader would kick in, and then you'd see those lines of services, right? And hopefully they would green. It would say okay, and then it would boot into the operating system, right?
Yeah.
And it was just a magical time. And then Ubuntu turned up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That really changed everything, didn't it?
And they were the friendly guys,
Yeah.
right? I'm not saying Red
Yeah.
Hat wasn't friendly, but
Yeah. I think what I
it,
remember from that era, so I started actually with Linux in 95, and my first one was Slackware with floppies. My friend made it to
whoa,
me, but I
that's like
hated it because it didn't have,
Linus Travolta era, right? Kind
yeah,
of thing.
like it was just CLI only, and it was like just basically a shell. Because I was an OS2 user, so I had everything. I had the awesomest thing back then. It was better than Windows. It could multitask. Um, so I was an OS2 nerd for like after high school and college. I was like the OS2 nerd until Doom came out, and
Of
then
course,
everybody was playing Doom. Um,
3DX, right? All that
yeah,
good
so
stuff. Yeah,
like
yeah.
I took a break, I think, away, and then it wasn't until afterwards Ars Technica wrote a story on SUSE, and I tried it,
Yes.
and I went to a computer store and I bought the actual green box.
Do you remember the big boxes?
Yeah, the big boxes. Yeah, and what I didn't like, I think, here's why Ubuntu was awesome, because it did do a few things that people take for granted now, like the focus on picking things. But back then, because everything was distributed by CDs, distros were so huge. Like I remember, you bought Mandrake Linux, and then there was the Mandrake Power Pack, which was like 3 more CDs or DVDs of just like a bunch of RPMs, right? And then like the typical Linux back then, like you clicked a menu and there would be 10,000 apps because
That's
there were,
right.
and it was just this thing. And then Ubuntu came out and it was totally not that, right? It was one text. Mark was very specific, right? Like just pick the best app for everything that matches and make it look like a cohesive thing, And then by then, the internet was like happening, and the idea of just pseudo apt installing stuff instead of installing a huge, you know,
Library. Yeah.
yeah, it's like I saw this huge library, and in 2 years, I got to find the same, the updated version that comes in the magazine. So I do the thing. So Ubuntu was almost like a fresh breath of fresh air. It was very minimalist. And I think that's one of the reasons it took off. And also, since it was new, it could start with the new stuff, right? So it never had to go through like those old kernel upgrades where like back in those days, like the difference between Linux 2.0, 2.2, and 2.4 were like huge.
Yeah,
Right?
huge breaking changes, right? Like
Yeah.
architectural changes.
Yeah,
Like,
you're
I
like, man,
remember those.
SMP doesn't really work on this one. Like SMP wasn't like good into 2.4, I want to say. And 2.6, I think, was the one that people, I remember that kernel was like it's almost like a watershed moment.
Yeah,
Uh
I completely agree. And like you said, I've probably walked a similar journey to you. I didn't start off with Slackware because
Yeah,
I was a
yeah,
Command and Conquer fan, so I needed Windows in my life, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
SUSE, yeah, I absolutely love that one. But
What was
yeah, like,
Corel Linux was a good one. That was a
do you remember
Debian.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because that was before Ubuntu, and they kind of tried the same thing. Let's take Debian, because back then the Debian system was clearly like awesome, right?
on
Like they were
top.
doing
Yeah.
stuff. And there was one called User Linux that I think a lot of people forget that also tried the kind of Ubuntu was like the third attempt at someone doing a Debian thing, and I think what made it fire off, even though we got a lot of criticism for it back then, was the investment in Debian that Mark wanted to do, despite the gnashing of teeth. But it was like, we're gonna make this thing work, and we kind of worked really hard until it worked. And a lot of people who are not me helped make that happen. And to this day, the Debian Ubuntu thing, just keep cranking out releases, so it's working.
Yeah, so it's a blessing and a curse, right? The whole Linux ecosystem, right? So the way I always look at it is I always make the joke of there's a new Linux distro every week. That's what it was like back in the day,
Yeah,
right? Because somebody wanted to slightly have something different, right, than the previous release, right?
yeah,
Or the previous distribution. So it would be a different desktop environment, or I don't like the way the icons work or how the graphics are
yeah,
rendering, so I'm just going to build my own operating system, right? Like that was
yeah,
that was like a bit of a humorous tag. And then, but I really feel like in recent years, like you said, the analogy of pick the best app and the best like technology trend.
yeah,
And I feel like that's really pushed it forward, right? In
yeah,
terms of having a great place in the ecosystem, because Microsoft and Apple have been doing this for years,
yeah,
right? Like, if you've got too much choice, then you're going to slowly move forward. But if you band
yeah,
together, right, then you've got more of a chance of, putting your flag in the ground. And I feel like, those Red Hat based distros, right, those Debian based distros, everybody knows what Fedora and Ubuntu is,
yeah, yeah.
right?
I think choice paralysis is probably the number one thing, you know, because people are like, I'm so confused. All these Linuxes confuse me. And the only answer you can tell people like that is go to Best Buy and buy a Chromebook, and that'll solve your problem.
Yeah,
That sucks. I mean, I love Chromebooks, but I also want an alternative to Chromebooks, and I want the Linuxy part. So a lot of the choice paralysis, I think, what I've been concentrating on lately, with like Project Bluefin and things like that, is kind of downplaying the differences between these things. It's like I kind of don't want such an opinionated thing to come out of my operating system. Just boot, make sound work, make video work. I'm not going to use your packages anyway, other than the base image, and I just kind of concentrate on like if you're a developer, your containers are already kind of, where do you work? They'll tell you what they'll tell you what
exactly,
they'll tell you what
exactly.
containers you're going to use. So for me, it's become more of a generalized thing, and I don't consider like the Linux distro kind of like the primary identifier of me, which is weird because when you grew up, right,
It's
it
what
was
it
like
was,
I'm an
right?
Ubuntu guy. Like being the Ubuntu guy was part of my personality, right? Part of my And all Linux users are like, you all have that Arch user who's like
But yeah,
very Arch, right? Like in your friend group. you know?
hardcore, right? I make a joke about that in the CNCF groups that I run here,
Yeah.
and it's like, and then people go, "Where do I start?" And I just say, "Start with the one that's got the most support and the biggest community around
Yeah.
it." Right? I said, just make your life as easy as possible because
Yeah.
it's a learning curve regardless, right?
Yeah.
So
And these days I know like, there's this kind of nerd cred thing where it's like you haven't lived until you've compiled your own Wi-Fi driver, right? And it's like,
I've done that.
well,
I've done that, yeah. But
unless
yeah,
you want a career in working in wireless hardware, then the rest of us, I might want to move on to Kubernetes here because I've got stuff to do. So, I tell people whatever gets your work done. And, you know, um, with the developer experience, I think with Windows on WSL and Mac being as prevalent as they are, I think not just the differences between Linuxes, but I think the difference between operating systems is blurring a little bit more. And I'm for that, because if the developer experience is the same, then I want Linux to compete, right, on the performance, the workflow, how fast it is. There's no VMs, like I can really, really shred on a pure Linux machine, because we know the server loads run on Linux anyway, and that's super hyper optimized. And it's just really nice when you see someone who has it set up, not me, because I'm always stabbing around, but like the people who really invest in their automation and getting their system going perfectly, like they can shred. They can really, really move fast, right? And as an open source developer advocate, getting open source developers to move fast is always worth an investment for me, right?
I think it's a really good piece of advice. If we think about the big hyperscalers, right? They partner with, top three. I'm going to call them Linux ecosystems, right? So when you think of Ubuntu and Red Hat, if I'm a developer, even if I'm on Windows, right? Windows Subsystem for Linux was just mind blowing. When that got released, I was like, popped a shell, and it was in Bash,
Yeah.
and I was just like, but it's on
I
my
still
Windows
remember the
desktop.
video with Scott Hanselman and Dustin Kirkland, and they're showing it. I was like, man, can you believe we did that? And then I know it's VM based now, which like makes sense, but back then they just translated all the API calls directly
Into the Windows kernel, right? Which is,
Yeah, or no, I think it was the Linux kernel or whatever. And I
right.
remember thinking about it back of my head. I was like, oh, that's not that hard. How many? There's like 400 of those, right? And then someone standing next to me who actually worked on it, he was like, actually, that's pretty hard.
It's pretty difficult, right?
Yeah, but now they got it slick, and it's like virtualized right on their thing, and it's nice, and other distros are on there. And man, they have such a nice terminal in Windows too.
That's right.
Yeah.
I got the Windows Terminal app, and then I haven't really played. Have you played with Warp yet? Have you played it?
I have played with Warp. I have.
What?
Yeah.
What do you think, George?
So I like a lot of the ideas. I think,
Yeah.
I think a login for your terminal is probably not, but you know how it is. What I would like to do though, so the terminal I'm shipping in Bluefin is called Tixis. It's also a new terminal.
Nice.
So I don't consider the Windows terminal the best one anymore.
Ooh.
But it has all this cool stuff, and it has built-in container integration, which I've always wanted, because you can have a tab that says Ubuntu, you can have a tab that says RHEL, you can have a tab and you can open them and you can interact with your containers like it was a host machine. So it's like a really nice flow. And I think a lot of the ideas in Warp with the autocomplete and the stuff, what I want to do is just duct tape that to the local LLM that's on the machine, and be able to kind of offer that experience. But I want it locally on my network, trained on my stuff. Like, wouldn't it be cool if I could rag in my work stuff that's locally on my machine into that LLM, and then that's tied into my terminal? So like my autocomplete is awesomer, and then when I fire up my IDE, it connects to that thing. And so there's like a lot of great ideas there, I think, that are around the terminal, which are really good. But I see Warp, I was like, oh man, I don't have any of the power to make any of that stuff. It's so they've got really nice UI things.
Yeah,
so I think what we're doing is, me and my group of friends, and in our projects, we're like, well, let's look at all the existing cool open source tools out there and kind of duct tape them together and see if you can I would love to rebuild the Unix command line experience, like around modern tooling and all that stuff. And I'm kind of faking it right now. So on Bluefin, which is like my distro, of course, because you had to make, you type a mode, and then I homebrew install like the Rust versions of all these tools, and people want fish, people want ZSH,
that's right.
And they see what, sometimes you see a stream and someone opens a terminal like a CNCF ambassador. I was like, what do they got going on there? That's awesome. So I would love to see more things like that around the command line experience, because that's like kind of who we are. as Unix nerds. So yeah, I'm all for warp, but I can't run. They don't have a Flatpak, so I can't really use it. So
So
you know,
I'm a fan of Flatpak,
yeah,
right? I feel like, to me, again, they're sticking their head above the sand, right? Trying to fix a
yeah,
problem that's been around for decades, right?
yeah,
So for me, it's like I have, like, what would you call them? Automated install scripts, so I can just, so if I do a fresh install, off you go, come back
yep. Mhm.
later, right? And all my apps are installed, right? On, because didn't it start off on Fedora? Is that right? Like, it was built onto Fedora first, and then, but you could install it on anything, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
you do. I mean, like some of the Fedora people were working on it and stuff. Red Hat's invested a lot, I think, in the Flatpak, like the command line, the tooling itself, right? And then there's Flat Hub, which is a
that's right.
store that's on top of that. And the reason I like them is, like, the XKCD where there's like 3,500 ones, whatever. And I was like, well, if the Linux desktop is sitting at 4%, why don't we just pick one? And they have a plan to pay developers or make it very easy for app developers to click a button and get paid. Um, there's no apt get pay an open source developer. So, you know, it's a generalized package format. It's distroless. It solves a problem. It at least tries to sandbox. Like if you grab a random deb or RPM from the web, like
You
people
don't
do
know where
now,
it's. You can't. You trust it but verified, right?
yeah. And if you trust, even if you trust the vendor, that package has post install scripts and they have root, like, and so I'm trying to. The reason I advocate for FlatHub is that zero trust model, and the whole, we don't have to wait for a small group of Debian developers to package the entirety of GitHub. That's just not going to work, and like it's not working as you can see, because when you go to GitHub pages and you find something cool, what do they tell you to do? Pip install it, brew install it, use, there's like installers in installers now. Like you can use brew to install Pixie, which is an installer for Conda, and it just become this huge thing. So at some point I'm like, you know what? Let's just pick one, right? So for graphical apps, on our images, we pick Flatpak. That's just what I use, and I just kind of ignore, and that has the major browsers in it and the major apps, right? So there's
That's
a
what
long
you
tail of
want.
apps that don't work, but I also want a little bit of curation. So if an app isn't on FlatHub already, that's one less piece of software I have to worry about. I'll just pick whichever one gives me the best experience. And, if I can click and know that I'll always get the latest version of that thing from the person who wrote it, it feels like other platforms because
I
they've
I,
solved that.
I love perusing the flat hub, right? Because I go,
Yeah,
ooh, I didn't know that existed on Linux. I didn't know they had that, right? It's
dude, there's this one called Warp. Write it down. It's not the terminal, but it's called Warp.
I'm
It's
writing it
just
down now.
magic wormhole in a GUI. So if you need to send a file to someone and you don't want to set up like a share or a Google Drive or do any of that, you both fire up Warp. You select the file. It gives you like a little word snippet. You paste that to them in Discord, and then it just zaps it to them.
No
Doesn't care about
way.
NAT. Everything just works. It's just like this magical, perfect, cute little tool that just saves a purpose. Another one's called Local Send. I love that one as well. You put that on your phone or on all your devices. You could just zap files to each other on a network. Because yeah, sure, at home I'm a nerd and I have like shares and I have a NAS and stuff. But sometimes you're just hanging out in a coffee shop and you need to zap a document over to your dad or something. So Local Send is another cool little app. I love little apps like this that are kind of, you're discovering, because usually, like, remember when you went to your lug, it's like the first 6 months is like how to use rsync. Now we just have these like magical little tools that just do all this kind of stuff without having to do the traditional stuff. But I do like that I still nerd out with my command line stuff, but for normal people, I'm just like, go browse through FlatHub. You're going to find a lot. I found a breathing one the other day that helps you breathe. That's kind of like you click it and it tells you to relax and you just follow it and it like helps you relax. Just all these all these little apps and things like that. And it's kind of made me fall in love again with like native apps, because as a Linux user, you just get so used to using the web because you don't
That's
have any
right.
apps compared to anybody else.
That's right. Yeah.
So like now that I have FlatHub, I've actually find myself being more invested in local apps than I had before, which I think is weird because I never thought I would come back to native apps. I thought I would be, all right, let's give up. I guess it's the web forever, and unfortunately that still is the case for a lot of people, but
So
sorry, I got doom and gloom there.
do you know what? I love the perspective of it, right? Like,
yeah.
I remember the first game I played on Linux, and it was Tron, right?
Oh yeah.
And
Like the 2D one, the walking one?
It was like 3D Tron. I think it came packaged with Mandrake, right? And I just remember it loading up, because you used to have to install Wine or whatever, right, to get most games working back then. Now, because of Steam, right? Steam,
it's all automatic.
It's all like
Yeah,
Half-Life 2, whatever you want to play, right? Is loads
play
of stuff
Halo.
like
It's a Microsoft game.
That's crazy.
Halo,
to
and it
think
runs
about.
great on Halo Infinite. Runs great on Linux. I log in with my Microsoft account and everything, and like it just goes, and you can slay out. And the multiplayer works, and it's fantastic. Yeah.
So, but yeah, even if you think about, and not a lot of people know this, but if the last 3 PlayStations were all built on Linux, and they still are today.
Yeah, we were at Canonical, the PlayStation 3. I think there was a kit.
Yellow Dog Linux, I think it was. They had to get rid of it because it introduced a 0 day, right? So
yeah, I remember there were people at Canonical who worked on that thing. There was like a Linux dev kit you can pay extra money for.
Keyboard, mouse, right?
Yeah.
And it would, you'd be able to install it, right? So
yeah. Now they're just PCs. So it's
pretty much. They're all AMD, right? Underneath the hood. But
yeah, I don't have a PlayStation, but I buy every single one of Sony's games because I have a huge ultra wide, and I play on Linux, and I played God of War, which is like their AAA
amazing game.
Just, the experience is incredible. I got VR, I got variable refresh rate. I don't have an HDR monitor, but that stuff is like finally all getting sorted, and I'm maxing it out at 144 frames a second. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Slick, right?
Yeah.
But no, it's awesome. I'm a big gamer as well, so
yeah,
we'll chat about that afterwards. So I'm just conscious of time because I know you were at start, right? But what skills would you say? Like for me, when I started off with Linux, like I said, it was more of a, I'm going to say bragging rights, right?
Yeah,
it felt rebellious, right? Because I felt like
I'm elite.
I'm not mainstream, right?
Yeah.
And now I have a Mac, so. That's gone full circle, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right? I just want a simple life these days. But what would you say, free skills? Because like everybody goes on the Kubernetes bandwagon. And to your point, George, like when I was starting off with Kubernetes a few years ago, and I went out on the internet and went, how do I get started? It felt like my early Linux days where I had 25 opinions, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you should use this, or you should Docker, and then there was no, that's not hardcore enough. You need to install a bare metals cluster, right? And you need to be using all different versions of, I call them like K8 distros, right?
Yeah,
is the best way to explain it. And it was such an battle learning curve because all I wanted to understand was the mechanics of how's this broken down into chunks, right? So what top 3 things would you say to folks to focus on, right? In terms of,
I would tell people this, and this might seem like an anti-pattern, is cloud native implies Linux. Every single cloud native person I know is like a Linux expert, right? However, that doesn't mean you have to be. But if you're going to get into cloud native from a technical perspective, I recommend strong basic Unix skills. Like, people are like, what distro should I use? Docker, Podman, blah, blah, blah. I was like, learn set and awk. Like learn how processes work in the kernel. This will become important later on. when Kubernetes, like all your stuff is getting killed on your Kubernetes cluster, you need to understand why, how swap works. So I would say having a and this could be distro agnostic, right? A process of how the operating system works, right? Because when you get to Kubernetes, then it will become more obvious, why things work the way they do. And that helps you kind of concentrate on the single node, which is going to be what you start with. Because at some point, you're going to start to add other computers, and that's where the complexity really bites you, right? So having a good fundamental on like how to start and stop services, how swap. It's still weird to me, like how very few people, including myself, understand how like RAM allocation and usage works in Linux. Like we should probably figure that out. So just like basic fundamentals, it doesn't like you don't have to know every little change that's coming in 6.14 or things like that, but like you can have that. And the second thing I would say, if you're going to go into engineering and stuff, is version control, understanding
Yeah.
that like every single little thing and piece of thing that you learn, you can keep in version control. So have a good self journal, keep good notes, understand, kind of how that life cycle works. So if you know how to close the loop, even if it's rough, you can always refine the loop because it's all about repetition. Remembering that it's all about repetition is something I would say. And then the third one, these are not in order of importance. But actually I would probably say this is the important one, is learn how to work as a team, right?
For sure.
Git, Linux, this is all distributed work. Kubernetes is just distributed computing. It's just distributed everything. 99% of the problems that we have when you're dealing in cloud native Linux and all that stuff is an anthropological problem, right? It's humans understanding how to work together as groups asynchronously, right? There's the like, because it's just not enough to be able. I could get in a room with 15 people and get some stuff done, right? But can you accomplish that same task with 15 people spread across the world, right? That is the trick, because it feels slower at first, but it's actually faster if you master asynchronous communication, working as a team. And a lot of those, they used to call them soft skills, how to write down scope, how to deal with scope creep, how to realize where the thing you're working on, where does that fit? Where does it start and stop? And when does another tool or project start and stop to handle that problem? So a lot of this is like project management kind of things. And I didn't realize until later on, those skills would have really helped me out if I would have realized how important they were earlier in my career. Because earlier in your career, you're very gung ho. I'm the engineer. I'm gonna master this thing better than everybody, and no one's gonna tell me what to do. I don't need to listen to those marketing people. What do they know? They're not nerds like we are, right? And now I'm like, oh man, I wish I would have taken a stupid marketing class in college. That kind of stuff. So like, if you can approach it as a kind of holistic view, after like you got to know a little PM, you got to be in marketing, you got to understand why CEOs say the words they do, right? Like you kind of understanding the little aspects of an organization is what I would recommend.
That's
That
some
was
sound
way
advice.
long-winded.
No. That was absolute gold, right?
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. So, final question, and this is more of a humorous one. Favorite operating system of all time?
Yep. 1 second. All time, OS 2 3.0 Warp will always be the GOAT to me.
Like, was that an IBM thing? Am I getting that
right? It
right?
was an IBM thing, but it came with a Windows subsystem because they broke up afterwards. So you can run Windows app natively on OS 2. And it was perfect back then. Modern era, I would say Project Bluefin.io is my one. But I think all time that had a fundamental, I don't know, that just vibe with me, and it kind of was that
resonated.
Yeah, the alternate, it was like not a lot of people used it, but like if you knew, you knew, and the experts knew, like so it kind of had that F1 car vibe to me that I'm trying.
That's awesome. Right.
Okay. Well, I have to go.
I know you have to jump, right? So thank you very much for coming on the show, George.
All right. Appreciate it. All right.
And catch you on the next one.
All right. I'll see you.
Bye-bye.